Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual FBI cases. In this episode, we get to speak to retired Special Agent Bea DeFazio. Now, Bea was with the FBI for 23 years, 7 as a member of the Special Surveillance Group, SSG, following spies in New York, and 16 as a special agent with the FBI in the Philadelphia division. During the last half of her agent career, Bea was assigned to ferret out child predators trolling in online chat rooms. She started an Innocent Images National Initiative Group 1 undercover program, setting up the internet and phone lines and purchasing the computers she and her partner needed to use to pose as children and teens. In this online undercover role, she engaged in conversations with child predators in an attempt to identify and gather the evidence to arrest them for soliciting in-person contact for sex and for exchanging child pornography, or more appropriately labeled child sexual exploitation images. Bea says that this emotionally difficult work was by far the most rewarding thing she did for the FBI. Bea also talks about her collateral duties as a member of the Evidence Response Team, ERT, and how she and her teammates, immediately after the terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center, were assigned to the Fresh Kill landfill, where they shifted through debris looking for evidence, personal effects belonging to the victims, and human body parts. Before we get to the interview, I just have 2 really quick things I want to say. First of all, I have to give a shout out to Rosaline. Rosaline sent me an email letting me know that she was driving cross country and that while doing so, she was listening to FBI Retired Case File Review. I am so pleased that as she drove that I was there to keep her company and entertained. The other thing I have to tell you is that on Saturday, a box arrived, and in it were 5 proof copies of my debut novel, Pay to Play. I was thrilled to actually hold the uncorrected proof in my hand. I cannot wait until this book is released on September 20th. All right, here's the show. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome my guest for today, Bea DeFazio. Hey, Bea.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. So I'm real excited about talking to you about innocent images and crimes against children and learning a little bit more about what it takes, for you to investigate, child predators. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, when you joined the FBI and why you joined the FBI?
Okay, well, I actually joined back in 1984. I always wanted to get into law enforcement, and I had a professor in college that kind of got me interested in the FBI, so that's actually how I got started. And after I, took the initial interview as a clerk in Newark, I stayed there for a couple months, and then I went to what they call, the Bureau has an SSG program, Special Surveillance Group, that's a non-agent position, and I worked in New York City for about 7 years doing, FCI work. Then I decided I was going to take the agent test because that's, why I had gotten into the Bureau, and I took the test. I wound up going to Quantico back in February of 91, where I graduated in May, and I was sent to the Philadelphia office, and back then you had to go to the applicant squad for 6 months where you did background checks. So I did that, and then I had the opportunity to work white-collar crimes and bank fraud. And I actually had an opportunity to go to Russia with the director, Free at the time, regarding a Russian money laundering case that I had. And then I was asked by our ASAC at the time if I would take over our Innocent Images program in Philadelphia. And I was jumped on board with that because I was, it was very rewarding, violation to work. So I started that, and I'm trying to think exactly the date. I think it was around 2000. And after I got done with the training and all that, I said to my supervisor at the time, I said, I think we really should get a what they call an Innocent Images program up. So I wrote the Group 1, which is basically an undercover operation, and I wrote that. Got that approved by headquarters and by Philadelphia, and then we went down to Baltimore where they do all the training. And I learned how, we had to set up undercover computers and undercover phone lines and, how to get on these chat rooms that these predators were in and, how they act with them and, what to say and that type of thing. And then so we got that approved. So we set up our undercover operation, and that's how it all began. So.
Now, you said that the ASEC came to you and asked you if you would start working that violation. Tell us more about that, because normally, you're told where you're going to go. Why did he have to ask you?
Well, it's not really a violation that everybody could work. It's hard to explain. It kind of weighs on you after you see it, a lot of things that go on in it. And I guess he thought that I had the even temperament and the ability to handle that kind of stressful situations that it would take. And I had heard about the program and I had talked about it. I'd not specifically with him, but my other supervisors. So that maybe got back to him that I was interested in. I was really honored that he thought that I would be able, to handle such a situation.
Yeah, it's a difficult program. I was asked if I would be interested in working it. And with 3 small kids, I had to make the decision, no. When you're working crimes against kids, you have to look at those pictures, which are basically images of child abuse. And
Correct.
For me, I thought it would be very difficult to have that in my head and to be able to go home, and be with my children. And I know many agents, who have kids can do it, and many agents who don't have kids, are able to do it. And so I admire you so much. Somebody has to work it. We need people to work that type of violation. So I admire you that you, I don't know what the best word to use, but, put your mental health on the line in order to work this violation. Can you talk to us about that? When you first saw some of the child predator images.
Well, when you go in for the training, you can't prepare yourself to see what you're going to see. People can tell you about it and say, well, this is what you might feel and how you're going to look at it. But until you actually see, some of the images, which, as you described, are pretty horrific, you can't really know how you're going to feel about it. And, we do go, for, mental health assessment, I want to call it we did once a year. Where they did, actually the agents who did the actual undercover work, they go twice a year, but they sent us just once a year for it. And, we had to take the test and the interviews, and if they didn't think we were, able to still handle it, they wouldn't have let us continue to do it. So, but it's like I said, it's hard to describe unless, you actually see the images, and it's probably easier to talk to somebody about it who has already seen them because they kind of know what you've been going through. And, it does take a toll. And I can understand why, there was a lot of guys on my squad that, I would ask them for help on cases. And some of them said, I can't do it for you. Or, some, most of them were willing to, help me out, 100%. But it's a difficult violation because, your first instinct is when you see this stuff that you want to, strangle a guy doing it. And you can't do that. You have to, when you interview these guys, you actually have to be almost polite to them. And
why is that?
Well, because they react better to that. They don't. If somebody, some big tough guy comes in and says, "You're going to tell me this, and this because you did this, and this," they're just going to shut down on you. And I would say that I'd say about 95% of the time when I started talking to them, they just kind of opened up and trying to make excuses for why they did what they did. And you have to act like you understand why they did it. And that's extremely difficult because you're saying to them, well, I can understand that they enticed that the victim enticed you and wanted you to do that, and whereas that did not happen, but you have to kind of try and put yourself into their mindset, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does, and really, that's no different than how we interview every subject. I mean, on TV, they make it sound like you're always tough and shouting.
Oh, yeah.
Screaming at people. But in reality, for most FBI interviews, if you want to call them interrogations, we try to be as nice. We're here for you. We're here to help as we can be because we're trying to pull information out of people.
Exactly.
But in your situation, oh, my God, to try to pretend, that you understand and that they were justified in what they were doing.
Right.
Again, the mental toll that could possibly take on, an agent working this kind of stuff is you can see exactly, how hard that could be.
Yeah, it like I said, you see things that like a normal person is hopefully, God willing, will never come in contact with stuff. And you see the, I think you see the, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but you see the darkest side of people that could actually do this to a child, and it's like I said, you have to be able to discuss it, and probably the easiest people to discuss it with is like, the guys who used to, my other partner in Philadelphia, we used to do it together, and we'd be in the undercover operation room, and we'd be talking to these guys on the internet, and then in the meantime we'd be saying things to one another, like, I won't even repeat what we said to one another, but you just have to let off steam that way, and you do let steam off. And like I said, I still remember basically every case I worked in, a lot of the images that I saw that you're never going to forget, but you just have to, you have to find a place for it and say, well, look, this is I feel good because I, helped a lot of kids, and I'm sure I prevented a lot of kids from being, injured and hurt, by these predators. So that makes me feel better. And it was probably the most rewarding, or I know it was the most rewarding cases that I ever worked in the Bureau. So that's how I rationalize it. Yeah.
I don't know how many times I'm going to say during this interview or think it, thank God there are people like you who can work it because it needs to be worked. And I knew that I couldn't do it. I knew that I couldn't do it. All right, so you've mentioned a number of times a Group 1 undercover. Before we get into that, tell me when you were first asked to do this type of violation, to work innocent images cases, what was going on in the office that you felt you needed to step it up and have a undercover investigation? Well,
you would be following leads from other offices to check out, maybe do a search warrant of an individual's house that they had, found in Philadelphia area that, had child pornography images on their computer. And, I kept saying to my supervisor, there's a lot of guys that are in Philadelphia they're out there, and it's like putting fishing in a barrel. There's so many of them out there that they need to be stopped, and I think that we could probably do, not that we weren't doing good work then, but we could do better work if we actually had the capabilities of actually, building our own cases and maybe even actually helping out other offices, because not every field office has an innocent images undercover operation. Baltimore was doing a lot of the cases at the time, and they were just being inundated with requests. And, I said, this is something I think I want to take on. So like I said, I wrote the Group 1 undercover operation, and it was approved, and we started, helping out other offices.
All right. So what did you do?
Well, the one particular case, I had got a call from one of the agents in Pittsburgh, and he said that he'd been contacted by the local authorities that they had a police officer that was actually meeting. The parents had discovered that their kid was meeting with the police officer, and they had discovered conversations on the child's computer, and they found them, very upsetting. So they didn't really know who to contact. And like I said, they contacted the local authority, and local authorities really didn't have the capability to do this kind of work back then. So they contacted our Pittsburgh division, and Pittsburgh did not have an undercover operation. So the case agent contacted me, and he said, hey, Bea, I need your help on something. And so we talked about it. And I said, well, send me everything that you have. The victim in this case was a 14-year-old boy, and he had been meeting this Baden Township police officer for sex, and they had met, several times before the parents discovered this. And so I said, well, send me all the chats that they had, because if I'm going to take on this kid's persona, I need to know what they said to one another, what they've done with one another, how they arranged the meetings and all that type of stuff. So he sent me a lot of the chats that they had and a lot of the conversations. And it was kind of time sensitive, because the police officer wanted to meet again with the child. So I had to, probably, I don't know, maybe a day's time, I had to read all of these chat logs and try and figure out. I had to make sure that I said the right thing, because I didn't want this police officer to get spooked. So finally, we were ready. So I went into the area that the police officer was in, and he just started chatting with me again, and we were talking about this and what we had done in previous encounters in the van, and what he wanted to do. to me again and all that type of things, which I won't go into graphic detail, but you had, like I said, you had to know that kind of stuff. So,
I know by chat, that you're talking about a written chat. I just wanted to make that clear for people that were listening who may not understand.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Now, you didn't have to verbally
correct
discuss this with him. It was all something that you typed in this chat room.
Yeah, it was like, if you wanted to compare it with something like the instant messaging back and forth with one another now that they do that type of thing. And so we were in this room, and he said, that he really needed to meet up again. And I was like, well, we'll meet up. So there was this one particular parking lot he liked to meet up in. So I made arrangements to meet up with him. And the FBI in Pittsburgh had a surveillance on him at the police station. So they saw him. The whole time I was talking to the predator, I was talking to the case agent saying, this is what we're saying, this is what we're going to do. And, I said, well, he wants to meet up at this particular location. He's like, okay, give me a few minutes and we'll get, cars over there so that we can set up. So we chatted for a little bit longer, and then I finally said that, I made up some excuse that, I could get out of the house at that time, so I was able to go. And he pulled out of the police station in his white van and showed up at the mall there, and, they were, recording all this and taking it all down. And obviously, the child wasn't there. So he comes back, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes later, and something told me to stay on the chat or the chat room line. So I did. I stayed on there and just, I didn't chat with anybody else, but I just kept the line open. And he came back in. He says, what happened to you? Where were you? And I said, well, I couldn't get out. My parents came home, and I'm not going to be able to get out tonight. I was careful not to say, you want to meet up another time. I let him make the suggestion that, he goes, well, how about, we get together tomorrow night? And I said, I think I can get together. My parents are, not going to be here again, supposedly. And in the meantime, he said to me, he goes, well, if you're going to get out, he goes, why don't you bring a friend with you? And I said, I think I have another person that I could bring with me. So we made arrangements again to meet at the same location the next day, and we left it at that. So I told the case agent, what was going on, and so they made arrangements the next day they picked him up at the same location that we were supposed to meet up at and arrested him then. So that was probably very, very rewarding, the fact that we actually got this guy off the street, because he was, at the time he was talking to me, he was also talking to a couple other individuals, and I think one of them, if I remember correctly, was not a minor, but the other one was just in high school. I didn't mention it before, but what was so particular about this police officer is he went around to these local schools, like elementary schools and high schools. He was part of the DARE program, they called it. It was I think it's drug abuse resistance education. I think most people have heard of the DARE, keep kids off drugs. So he would actually go into these elementary schools and these high schools and talk to these kids, about, staying away from drugs and, how evil the drugs were and all. And so he had access to kids all the time, which was very scary.
Oh, and, extremely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this is just not a case, even though that, and I don't want to say just, not a case just about having images on their computer, because I understand that is serious too, because it's all about supply and demand.
Right.
Somebody is creating those terrible images of child abuse that somebody is looking at. So,
right.
But in this case, not only was he doing that, but he was actually meeting with this young 14-year-old boy and engaging in physical, sexual activities.
Yes, they had met, according to the child, 4 times or 5 times, and then the police officer said it was about 5 times that they had already met for sexual encounter. If he hadn't have been stopped, he would have just continuing with this boy. And when they searched his computer, he was in the process of exchanging, other child pornography images with other, pedophiles out there, and he was in the process of talking to other kids to arrange meetings with them. So, that was rewarding in the sense that we, got him off the street, curtailed his liaisons for a while.
Now, had he taken photographs or videos of his encounters with this young boy?
Oh, yes, yeah. They had exchanged, that's part of, like, the grooming process when they start talking to these kids is, they'll show them other images of of maybe encounters that they've had or encounters that somebody else has had, that it's okay for them, it's okay for them to express their desires. It's okay for them to do it, in other words. Nobody's going to get angry with them.
Yeah, look at these pictures. Other kids have done it. It's
right.
Okay. You can do it too.
Yeah.
And so those pictures of this young boy, are still out there. They're probably being shared and viewed by pedophiles, all over the world.
Yep.
There's
nothing you could do about it. And that's why it's hard to describe to your kids nowadays. I have a niece and nephew, and it's like, don't put anything out there that you don't want people to see, because you're never going to get it off. And so this poor kid, who's probably, oh my God, I know he's in his maybe his 20s now. I haven't been able to follow up to see how he's doing. He's going to be emotionally scarred for the rest of his life, and hopefully, we'll be able to overcome what this individual's done to him.
Do we know how they met?
There's rooms and the actual chat rooms that you have to. Some chat rooms you have to be asked to enter, but they have these child predators have a whole network of other child predators and different sites that they know to go to if they want different, if they want a young boy, if they want a young girl, if they want both. I mean, it's unbelievable. The whole, it's almost like I can't even describe it. It's almost like a enterprise that they have, and they make a lot of money off of sharing these things too.
And I want to be very clear that by asking this next question, I am in no way trying to blame the victim.
Right.
But I'm trying to get an understanding of why the child goes to that site.
Sometimes kids are curious, and other times kids have these urges, and they may feel a tendency to be drawn towards, if they're a young boy, be drawn towards other young boys, and and they find out about these chat rooms. You know how kids are yourself, that they can basically get on the internet and find out anything they want to, and somehow this kid found this site that this police officer was in, and they started chatting, and like I said, it was part of his grooming process. I think they talked for about a month together before they actually met, and this 14-year-old, from what he says, and I'm not going to say he wasn't telling the truth, but it was his first time he'd ever actually had a sexual encounter with somebody. Like I said, the grooming process, he felt comfortable enough to meet with this guy and to what he thought was okay, and it was the right thing to do, because this child predator actually basically convinced him that it was okay to do.
That's so scary. I mean, it's so scary as a parent that you have your young child on the internet meeting these strangers and being groomed that way. So what happened at the end? Did the boy have to testify? Did the police officer, and I hate to keep calling him a police officer.
I know.
But this person, this child predator,
right?
Did he plea? How did the case end?
Probably the only decent thing that predator's ever done in his life was he pled out, so that the victim did not have to testify in court. Otherwise, the child would have had to go to court and testify to all the encounters that they had and how they met and all that. But he pled out, and he was eventually sentenced to 90 months, which is a little over 7 years in jail. Wow. And then when he got out, he was on probation, and he had to register as a sex offender. Probably as a tier 2, which is, if I'm remembering correctly, you actually had an encounter with a minor, sexual encounter with a minor. You probably have to register to that, and I think that's a mandatory of 25 years. I think you have to be on the list as a sex offender.
Now, this particular case was significant because it was a police officer, but I would imagine you worked this violation for 7 years. This is just one of many similar times where you went online, pretended that you were a victim, and were able to lure in a predator. Right. In the Innocent Images program, we called what we called the travelers. There was known chat rooms these predators hung out in. So we would actually go into those rooms, and you were in there for, I don't know, you went into a room, you were in there for maybe 10 seconds, and you, at any given time, you could be talking anywhere between 8, 10, 12 guys at the same time that were interested in in you. And so we call them travelers because to be a federal offense back then, they had to travel over state lines, and you would go in there and you talk with them, and then you would make you never asked them for anything, to meet or anything. You always let them do it.
And, they would get in there and they'd talk to you. And, you'd be talking to some of these guys for just a week or so, and then some of them you would talk to for a month or so. Kind of sounds sick, but you had to know the ones that were really serious about meeting up with you, or if they were just, feeling everything out because they were new to the whole scene. The ones that you felt were the ones that really were serious about it, then you started talking with them, and I would make arrangements to meet them at a hotel, and you wanted to make sure that they gave you the hotel, and the more that you could do to actually tie them down, like, I know the one guy I asked, well, you have to bring me some kind of a present so that I know, that you really, are in love with me or whatever. And so he brought me a red rose, and you had to make sure that was in the chat, that, he was bringing you a red rose and he was going to meet up at a certain hotel. And when he did, he showed up at the hotel, and we, myself and the other agents we were hanging out in the lobby, and, we saw him, we knew what he looked like. And we made sure that he actually went up to the register, and he actually, paid for the hotel room and everything and he was started on his way up to the hotel room before we actually arrested him. And then when we arrested him and, took possession of his vehicle, we found the red rose, and all those things were like circumstantial, but, the hotel room he had registered, and he brought the rose, and at a certain time he was going to do it. And all that was brought up, in the court proceedings. And he actually was stupid enough to go to trial, but he didn't want to go to trial with a jury. He wanted to go to trial just by a judge. So we had to go through the whole entire trial process where all the transcripts were read and all the graphic images that he had sent were shown, and he actually got sentenced by the judge. I think it was, at the time, it was 5 years, which doesn't seem like a whole lot of time for these guys, but he, his defense and his defense attorney said, well, there was no real victim involved, which was always a sore spot with me and agents work in this case is, it wasn't, you say it wasn't a real person or a real victim, but it would have been if it had been some other little child that he was going to meet up with. And,
absolutely.
So that was always, that was their defense in every single case. Most of them didn't go to trial because they didn't want the embarrassment, but the ones that did go, that was their defense that, there was no real victim involved.
Over the 7-year period, how many subjects would you say you were able to identify and bring charges against?
Oh, Lord. I don't even know. I mean, it was between myself and the other individuals at the time it worked at, there was a lot. Maybe, I don't know, hundreds of them. I mean, it's like I said, a fish in a barrel. It never stops. I mean, wow. As soon as you got one, there'd be another one. And I'm sure it's been 7 years, but I know it's probably gotten worse now because they have, Facebook and Twitter and all those other things that they really have to be careful of.
Wow. I mean, when you said hundreds, I kind of shuddered a little bit. When you're doing this undercover role, for every case, you have to decide who you are and also where you're located. So you're not always somebody, a young boy or a young girl in the Philadelphia area.
Right.
Depending on where the predator is, you make that decision as to where you are. Right.
And, it's difficult sometimes, and I'm sure it's like I said, it's more difficult now because when I was doing it back then, they just wanted phone calls, so that was easy enough to set up, with the undercover lines we had. But now, when I left, they were starting to want pictures of you, and which is harder and harder to get because you really can't manufacture a picture of a child. You actually have to have, a picture, and so it was a little bit more difficult. But we got a lot of agents to actually give us their pictures, from when they were younger. And, they knew when they were giving these pictures up that they, were going to be out there for good. But, I have to commend them for allowing us to use them. So it was difficult because you had to coordinate with the case agent, and like I've been using Arizona a lot because you didn't know the geography or anything. So if these guys were saying something you didn't know, what you were talking about, they'd be like, a lot of them would say, "Are you a cop, or are you really who you say you are?" And you had to get out of that. And sometimes you didn't get out of it. There was a couple that just like, I'm not talking to you anymore because I know you don't know who you say you are and all that. So, but then that would lead to, well, maybe I got to change my identity because he's going to put it out there that so and so, using the screen name is a cop, so don't talk to him anymore. So you had to be careful with that. There's a lot of little glitches in there that you had to be careful of.
This is just unbelievable. I know, as an FBI agent that this was going on, that there were law enforcement people in these chat rooms pretending to be, children, or in some cases, I guess, other predators trying to hear what's going on with another predator.
Right.
So we all knew at any moment a predator could be talking to somebody in law enforcement. They had to know that too. So why were they in there? Why did they risk that?
Because they can't control themselves. What angers me is when you see these child predators get out and they're like, oh, he's cured now. It's not. They can't be cured. It's like I always tell somebody, it's like being an alcoholic. You always have to watch. You can't go back to the drinking. Well, these guys, it's like telling a normal person that you can't love your husband or your wife. That's what they're, instead of loving their wife, they love little kids. It's hard to explain, and it's a desire and a need that they just are willing to take that chance to have.
It's some screwed-up wiring taken in their brain that can't be fixed, can't be rewired. No,
I'm a firm believer, and a lot of experts. Ken Lanning, he's a huge pioneer of innocent images and the child predators. He'll tell you right up front that these guys can't be cured, and they can't be. And a lot of them they'll go for being what is it called? They have to take the shots, the testosterone shots or whatever to try and curtail that. But a lot of them will be willing to take it, but then they don't like the side effects, so they stop taking it and they start back up to what they were doing. So I'm one of these people that they can't be cured. So don't try and sell me that when they tell me that they are.
So you did this for 7 years. Why did you stop?
Well, I retired. Came down with MS back in '99. I was diagnosed with it. It got to the point where between the stress of the job and everything, it was like I have to, for my health reasons, I had to retire. Probably as long as they let me do it, I would have still continued doing it. That was really the only reason why I stopped working it, was because I had to retire. So I know there's, people in Philadelphia that are still carrying on, and I hope, it's an extremely important violation. And I know that all that's going on in the world with terrorism and all that needs to be addressed, but we can't forget that this is happening to our kids, and it's a terrible thing to say, but I feel it's only going to get worse because of the internet. And it's going to, you have to consider the child trade, sexual trading in all these other countries. And the sex trade is predominant in, other countries. And we have a lot of Americans that travel over there to, partake in it because it's not illegal over there. Unfortunately, it's something that's not going to go away. We need to keep working on it, even though it's, for every one person you get, there's another 10, 20 of them out there. It's frustrating, and, people, I don't think they realize it until maybe they start seeing what's going on.
I was going to ask you, we talk about this police officer. Were there other professions that these predators belong to that kind of shocked you?
Oh, you had doctors, lawyers, dentists. I think the people, when they first think of a sexual predator, they're like, oh, this really creepy old guy that sits in his basement all day and just chats on the line. But, for example, this police officer was married and had 3 children and was living an exemplary life besides the fact that he was a child predator. No one suspected it. His wife said she didn't suspect it. These people lived a normal, everyday life, supposedly, and they had a secret life. It's very scary because, I always say, well, what do you don't know what your next door neighbor's doing? And the bad thing about it, I think it kind of makes you distrustful of people.
Do you think that happened to you?
Yeah, I definitely think, because, I know that, there are people out there that just like kids and they're willing to just help them out with things, but I always get distrustful of them initially, and I know that's not probably the right thing to do, but that is one of the bad things about it. You do become distrustful of people's motives especially when they're around kids. It left me. I don't know if it leaves everybody that way, but I know that I am distrustful when I see somebody, paying extraordinary attention to kids when they don't have any, and they're, it's hard to explain.
No, I get it. I get it. All right, let me ask you some technical questions. For instance, you mentioned that Americans travel to different countries to engage in, these sexual crimes against kids.
Right.
Do I understand correctly that it is illegal in the U.S. for an American citizen to travel outside of the country? So tell me a little bit more about that.
I'm going to use Thailand for an example. If they go over there to have sex with minors and we're talking little kids, 5, 6, 7 years old, and a lot of businessmen will travel over there to do it. And when I left, they were trying to get a grasp on some of these guys that were traveling, and they were trying to figure out some way that they could arrest them, for doing this. And when I left, this was another whole big initiative that they were taking on. The child sex trade in the United States is, you don't want to think that exists, but it does. I mean, not getting off topic, but I remember that they brought one of these young girls into one of our training classes to talk to us that has actually been a slave. She hung out at a truck stop, and her operator or pimp or whatever you want to call him, she would hang out at the truck stop and she would go around to these guys and perform various sexual activities, and he was selling her out for sex, and that was another sex trade that I know the Bureau was trying to get into, but that it's more difficult because it's. And
how old was she when she did this?
She was 16 when she was talking to us, so she was like 12 years old when she had done it. And she just she was lucky enough to get out, and lucky enough to come across people that cared enough about her to get her out, and then she was willing to actually come to these classes and talk to us about how these things happen and how they work. And it's a typical thing you see on television, that these girls get on the bus and go to the big cities, and they actually have people waiting for them to get off the bus and start talking to them and grooming them and saying befriending them and trying to get them comfortable with them. And it kind of operates as something like that, but not as dramatic as how they portray it on television.
All right. And another question I have: you had indicated that when you first started working this violation, and again, what were the years, that the 7-year period that you worked?
From 2000.
So you were saying that during this time period, a lot of local law enforcement agencies were not working this. And I know that since 9/11, many things that the Bureau used to do, we don't have the manpower and resources to do it as much because we're concentrating on terrorism. Do you know now if local law enforcement is more involved?
Well, I definitely know that they are, because besides doing the innocent images, I actually started what we call, I hope it's still in existence in Philadelphia. It was called the Crimes Against Children Multi-Agency Working Group, and that involved a lot of other federal agencies, Postal Service, Secret Service, but it also involved a lot of local police departments throughout the Philadelphia metropolitan area. And they were setting up their own. They would go for training, usually to Baltimore, because I keep referring to them. But they're where the innocent images started, and they're really good at training everybody. They would go there, and they would pick up the training, and then they would learn how to set up their undercover operations. And I know when I left, a lot of local law enforcement was taking on our innocent images, how we collected the chat logs and how we collected the evidence and how we went around to arresting them. They were using our program as their program, I should say.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to say that would sum up the work that you did with innocent images and crimes against children?
Well, I think the only thing, like I said, it was the most rewarding work that I did in the Bureau. And besides doing the innocent images, I also went around to local schools and talked to kids, and I went meet with parent groups like PTAs and all that. And I stress to the parents, don't think because your kid is in the house on the computer that he's safe. So know what your kid's doing and be a nosy and be a spy and be accused of, ruining their lives. But, know what your kid's doing on the internet, because just because, like I said, he's in the house and where he is doesn't mean that they're going to be safe from these guys. That's why I even joined Facebook, to keep track of my niece and nephew. You have to be diligent and don't ever think that it can't happen to your kids, because I don't know how many parents that I talked to said, my child would never do something like that. And then you show them what they've been doing, and they're like, I didn't know that they could do this. You have to start being almost as savvy as your kid on the computer as they are. You're the first line of defense. And when you have children, you know how sometimes how sneaky they can be if they really want to do something, So they find a way to do something if they really want to do it. And if these guys are good at, coaching them how to get around their parents and stuff. So it's there, and it's not going to go away, so people need to be aware of it.
Now, I know working innocent images and crimes against children was very important to you, but I also know that there was another time that you were involved in FBI investigation that was also very important and had a dramatic effect on you, and that would be working 9/11. Could you talk to me a little bit about that and what you were assigned to do in those early days after the planes went into the tower?
Well, everybody always asks, where were you when John F. K. was assassinated? Well, now they ask people, where were you when 9/11 happened? And I was actually in our squad area, Squad 10, and I was getting ready to go over to our off-site, and our evidence response team coordinator came running to the office saying, the World Trade Center has been hit by a plane, and so pack your bags, we're going to, New York. I was like, oh, my God. So we were up there that night in Newark, and we got our assignments that we were going into New York the next day. And I remember going through the Holland Tunnel. They had all traffic stops, so nobody was allowed to go in through the Holland Tunnel, but they let law enforcement go through. And that's the first time in my life that I'd ever gone through the Holland Tunnel without any traffic. Because if you remember me saying that I did surveillance in New York City for 7 years, so I use that tunnel every day. But that was just an eerie feeling.
So you were assigned to go up because you were a member of ERT, the Evidence
Response Team, right. Mm-hmm.
And how long had you been doing that?
Since 1998, so what is that, 9 years. Yeah, 9 years we've been doing it before I left.
And being a member of the Evidence Response Team was a collateral duty, something
Correct.
that you did in addition to your regular assignments on a squad working various violations.
Right. That was a whole separate entity. We had to go to Quantico and actually be trained on all types of different body recovery, blood analysis, photography, and all that. I think at the time there was 12 of us in Philadelphia, and then I think there was 1 or 2 in each RA that we had. And the whole team was called up from all the RAs and the whole from Philadelphia to go up there. But we got up to New York, and they assigned the Philadelphia division to the Fresh Kill landfill up in Staten Island. And that's where all the debris from the World Trade Centers was taken to Staten Island and gone through methodically. I mean, we were looking for the black boxes and all that. So we were assigned up there for the first, we were there for a little over a month the first time we went up.
How long after the towers came down did you go out to New York to start beginning the collection of evidence?
We were actually in Newark the night before, and then we were there the next day. And I remember initially going into the city, and there was places where, you couldn't hardly breathe. The cloud was so bad. And seeing people, they saw that we were FBI, and we had, people coming up to us and handing us pictures of their loved ones, saying, please, could you help us find our person, our sister or brother or whatever. And it's heart wrenching because you were thinking in the back of your mind, these people are not alive now. There was other teams up there, but our evidence response team coordinator and our team leader, both of them were extremely instrumental in setting up the whole entire operation in the Fresh Kill. And I can't give the one guy enough credit for actually setting it up, the whole process of recovery and whatnot. And I don't know if they ever did a special on the Fresh Kill, but like I said, all the debris from the World Trade Centers, everything was brought there, and we had to physically go through everything that was in that rubble, including there were body parts, there were personal mementos, and anything that would, if it wasn't a body part, anything that would identify a loved one, to help identify these people that that some of them never really got any closure because let's face it, the Ground Zero was the resting place for a lot of people's loved ones because they never recovered any of their body parts or anything.
So you've given these photos to be able to share with listeners of you at Fresh Kills, and you've got are they called Tyvek?
Tyvek suits on. Yeah, we had Tyvek suits, respirators. I mean, it was was, you were going through a lot of stuff that was very hazardous to your health. I mean, methane, the whole Fresh Kill landfill was methane gas. I mean, underneath of you could see on a rainy day, you could see the methane bubbling out from underneath of the ground. And if it ever stormed or lightning, we had to get off the whole area because it could have struck lightning. But what happened was all of the debris from the World Trade Center was put on these huge barges, and the barges were brought to Staten Island, and from the barges they were loaded into these huge dump trucks, and then the dump trucks would take and bring it up to the landfill, and they would lay it in one big heap, and then you would have these front loaders take it and spread it out in lines, and you would go through the lines piece by piece and pick up anything that you saw, or if like I said, we were looking for the black boxes and everything. And if it was a momentum, unfortunately, the first 2 or 3 weeks we found a lot of body parts, but there was sometimes
so physically this conveyor belt of debris would come by, and you physically would identify and remove and store human body parts.
That the first month or so we were up there, they didn't have the conveyor belts. They actually laid the stuff out in lines, and the local police and all that were instructed if you found anything that looked like human remains to come and get one of us. And myself and another agent that was kind of like, I hate to say this, our specialty of recovering human parts. So the two of us, they would come over and get us, and we'd say, yeah, that looks human, or we're not quite sure if it was just a bone or something. Eventually they got a forensic anthropologist to come up and help us identify if it was just a bone, if it was human or not. But yeah, for the first a month or so, we just did the lines, and then when we went back, they after the debris had been gone through that way, they actually took the debris that had already been gone through and put it on these long conveyor belts, and we would sit there and go through things. If we saw a wedding ring, I mean, we found actually a couple wedding rings that were going through, and that it doesn't seem like a lot, but that means a whole lot to somebody that has lost their loved one. And you'd find maybe a wallet or a piece of a wallet or a picture, and all these these things were all laid out for the victims of the families to go through and see if they could identify any of it. So that was, I forget how many people we actually identified through DNA from the body parts that were recovered up there. But, my heart goes out to to me, the real heroes are those firemen that went in, and the ones that went through all that rubble initially to recover the police officers and firemen. So
so during your FBI career, I mean, you have investigated or been a part of investigations that really, really took an emotional toll on you. I mean, first, working 9/11 and being assigned to retrieve human body parts, from a disastrous, horrendous terrorist attack, and then you working on, a child predator case where you're seeing these horrific images of child abuse. I mean, your career has been an emotional sacrifice. I can honestly, call it an emotional sacrifice, for the FBI and for the country.
Well, like I said, I'm just one person, but there are so many people out there. For, like I said, our whole ERT team and all the other ERT teams and all the innocent images people. There's a bunch of us out there, and thank God, we all want to do it. I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure that if you ask everybody else, they'd say if they had, knowing what they know, they'd do it all over again, and I would, because it was very rewarding. And when I start, you're never going to forget those things. And when you start thinking about it, or you see stuff on television about it, you say to yourself, well, it's bad, but I helped a lot of people, come to some type of closure, or I helped a lot of these victims. I helped a lot of kids to stop being victimized because we put these guys, away before they were allowed to do something. So it like I said, it doesn't go away, but you feel like you've accomplished something.
And that's the end of the show. As always, back at jerrywilliams.com, I have pictures of Bea. I also have links to a newspaper article about one of the child predator cases we discussed. And I have a link to the FBI overview about the crimes against children and the child predator program. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family and make it easy for you. At the bottom of the episode show notes, I have all the social media share buttons, so please tweet it, post it on Facebook, let others know about the episode and the podcast. So this is the part of the show where we talk about crime fiction. And the novel that I read this week was Beautiful Lies by Lisa Unger. Beautiful Lies is about a woman who receives in the mail a faded picture of a woman who looks like her and a little girl and a note that says, "Are you my daughter?" Now, this woman has been raised by a loving mother and father, and so she is confused and intrigued, and it's about her quest to find out who she really is. Now, Lisa Unger actually has 14 novels, but this is the first time I read anything from her, and I enjoyed it. It was written in first person, with her actually talking to the reader and telling her story. It was a different voice, it was a different way of introducing a character, and I thought it was refreshing. The story is very fast-paced at the beginning. At the end, it gets a little slower, and you kind of know where it's going. But the writing was good, the descriptions were good, the relationships and the character development was very good, and I would recommend it. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. I want to thank you for listening and hope you come back again next week for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.